Germany, don't get so comfortable. I'm coming for you next. The perpetrators of the largest genocide on European soil shocked the world by announcing its decision to intervene at the International Court of Justice, defending Israel against accusations of genocide in Gaza. For a country that has built its modern image around the atonement of its past atrocities, especially the Holocaust, this may seem perplexing. But beneath the surface lies an older, more brutal chapter of German history, one that remains largely unacknowledged. Germany is perhaps most famous not for its arts and literature, but for its failure to stand on the right side of history time and time again. We all know of the Holocaust and its horrors, yet decades earlier, in Namibia, the seeds of Germany's genocidal practices were already sown, when it perpetuated one of the first genocides of the 20th century. Let's take it back a bit. Following the unification of German states in 1871, Germany viewed colonies as essential to proving its status as an emerging world power. The acquisition of Namibia was a part of its effort to catch up with other European empires such as Britain and France. In 1884, during the scramble for Africa, Germany claimed what is now Namibia, turning it into a colony of Germany's Southwest Africa. From the indigenous Herero and Nama people, who thrived there for centuries, this marked the beginning of a devastating era. The German settlers, backed by the colonial government, seized vast tracts of fertile land, pushing the Herero and the Nama off their ancestral homelands. The Herero were primarily cattle herders, and the Nama, pastoralists and traders, both relied heavily on their land for survival. As settlers expanded their farms, ranches, and mining operations, the indigenous populations were driven to barren areas, destroying their ability to sustain themselves. But this was more than a mere land grab. It was an all-out assault on their way of life. The colonial government imposed heavy taxes on cattle and other goods, forcing the Herero and the Nama into debt. When they couldn't pay, the Germans took whatever was left. Cattle, land, homes, everything was seized. The indigenous people, stripped of their livelihood, were plunged into poverty. The Germans didn't stop at economic oppression. They imposed their own legal systems, displacing traditional authority structures and customs. Christian missionaries arrived to convert the Herero and the Nama, further alienating them from their cultural roots. The German government worked hand in hand with the church, and the Christian conversions often led to undermining of indigenous practices and governance systems. Between 1885 and 1903, over a quarter of the Herero cattle were taken by settlers through trickery, debt, and theft, and what was once a thriving community had become fractured and impoverished under German rule. In January 1904, after years of oppression, the Herero could take no more. Under the leadership of Samuel Maharero, they launched an armed rebellion, targeting German settlers and military installations. They killed around 120 soldiers and civilians. Maharero's letters revealed that he initially tried diplomacy, asking other African leaders for assistance in securing fair treatment from the Germans before resorting to armed resistance. Soon after, the Nama, led by Hendrik Witbooi and later Jacob Morenga, joined the fight with guerrilla tactics. Their objective was clear: reclaim their land, their freedom, and their dignity. Germany's response was swift and brutal. General Lothar von Trotha was dispatched to crush the uprising. Known for his previous brutal campaigns in German East Africa, modern-day Tanzania, he was famous for his racist and militaristic views, advocating for the total destruction of any resistance. Von Trotha sought to exterminate the Herero entirely. His infamous extermination order declared, "The Herero people must leave the land. If they do not, I will force them out with cannons." And force them out he did. His forces encircled the Herero people and drove them into the Omahake Desert. With no access to water, thousands were left to die. But this wasn't just colonial repression. This was genocide. German soldiers poisoned wells to ensure that anyone attempting to flee would perish. Women, children, the elderly, no one was spared. Estimates suggest that around 65,000 Herero and 10,000 Nama were murdered, representing about 80% of the Herero population and 50% of the Nama population. Those who survived the desert were rounded up and sent to concentration camps, where they were subjected to forced labor, starvation, and unspeakable violence. In Shark Island, one of the most notorious camps, German scientists conducted experiments with the bodies of dead Herero and Nama, using pseudoscience to justify their racial superiority. Women were forced to scrape the skin off the corpses of the skulls to be sent to Germany for racial studies, a haunting precursor to the Nazi Holocaust. German anthropologists and medical professionals like Eugen Fischer conducted racial studies that would later be used to justify racial hierarchies in Nazi ideology. For over a century, Germany refused to bear formal responsibility for the genocide in Namibia. Unlike its reparations to the settler colonial project called Israel, Germany has only recently begun to acknowledge the horrors committed in Namibia. In 2018, Germany finally returned some of the skulls it had taken and issued a formal apology. But even this gesture was hollow. The apology referred to the atrocities as massacres rather than genocide. And Germany avoided legal responsibility by calling reparations to Namibia a moral obligation. The difference, you may ask? By calling a moral obligation rather than a legal one, Germany not only avoids legal responsibility for its crimes, but more cynically makes Germany appear morally benevolent, while in reality, this theatrical display of goodwill does nothing to bring true justice to its victims. Germany's refusal to fully acknowledge its role in Namibia stands in stark contrast to its approach to the Holocaust. After World War II, Germany paid billions in reparations to Israel, essentially funding its occupation of Palestine, and took responsibility for its atrocities against the Jewish people. But in Namibia, the narrative is different. The Herero and Nama people are still fighting for justice. The 1.1 billion euros in development aid offered by Germany was seen as an insult by many. Protests erupted across Namibia, with descendants of survivors rejecting the agreement as a betrayal of their history. The joint declaration between Germany and Namibia, signed in 2021, was met with mixed reactions, as descendants of the victims felt that the financial compensation offered was inadequate and that the language used failed to fully acknowledge the gravity of the genocide. Today, as Germany stands in defense of Israel's right to commit atrocities in Gaza, we must confront an uncomfortable yet obvious truth. Germany wears a mask of tolerance and goodwill, whilst under that mask lies the haunting face of genocide and white supremacy. The language used by Germany and its apology for Namibia is telling. It called the atrocities genocidal conditions rather than genocide, attributing the violence to colonialists and not the state. This evasive language mirrors Germany's justification for Israel's actions in Gaza, defending the occupation's right to exterminate the Palestinian people. The story of the Herero and Nama people reminds us that violence of colonialism did not simply vanish. It evolved. Their resistance may not have led to immediate victory, but their fight is a part of a larger narrative of anti-colonial resistance. As we look at Germany's stance on genocide today, it is essential to remember its brutal colonial past. The same nation that paid reparations for the Holocaust refuses to do the same for Namibia. The legacy of genocide, racial oppression, and colonial violence remains a fundamental part of its colonial identity. Unless and until the colonialists of our world can look in the mirror and recognize this fact, we will not stand quiet and be lectured on what it means to be human, not while the blood of their victims remains fresh on their hands.